Good morning. So, I wanted to make a video about this misconception that is surprisingly common. To me, at least, was surprising. And at first, I thought it was just maybe like one person I've met, two people I've met. But now I fear that this is a misconception that's quite common on the online left, especially. Maybe not so common if you're involved in a socialist organization or an anarchist organization with a long history. But this misconception that I find is about anarcho-communism. And it's essentially this idea, this incorrect idea that anarcho-communism is a fusion of anti-authoritarian anarchism and authoritarian communism, or Leninism specifically. And no, that is not correct. In order to understand why this is not correct, we need to first define some of the words that we're using much better. Because communism, for example, everybody on the online left wants to be a communist. Everybody wants to share memes about how great communism would be. And as an anarcho-communist, I can agree, communism is a good thing. But what is communism? We need to define that well, because people don't define it very well. Communism, as defined by Marxists and as defined by anarchists, is actually pretty similar in its strict definition, with a catch. They are similar in that both Marxists and anarchists speak about communism as the society that we are striving for in the future, in which there is no state, in which the society is classless, and in which everybody is provided for. Everybody works as much as they are able to, and everybody gets what they need, from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. So that's the goal. But Marxists and anarchists view this very differently. The Marxist vision is that in order to get to communism, we first need to have socialism. And socialism, as defined by Marx, is specifically state socialism. This is where the state takes control of the economy, takes control of the means of production, and operates the economy on behalf of the working class. In fact, Marx would consider the state to belong to the working class, as he explained as the dictatorship of the proletariat. Anarchists had a very early critique of this, because what Marx and Engels were saying is that we're going to have this socialist stage, and eventually the stage will transition into communism. Engels said that the state would wither away, the state would disappear, and we will eventually get to communism. The anarchists, for example, Bakunin, had a very early critique of this. The anarchists would say, well, how's this going to happen? Like, how does this make sense? You build up a state, you empower a state that is supposed to represent the workers, but isn't really directly the workers. It's not the same thing. So the anarchists were saying, wait, you're building up a powerful state? How's that going to get to communism? Isn't that like going in the opposite direction? Isn't that like building up this massive like societal structure that is an oppressive structure? Isn't that gonna inherently take us further away from communism? And the Marxists, of course, would answer with saying, no, silly anarchists, you're being impractical. We can't just transition to communism immediately. We have to build up this state. The state will belong to the working class, so it will not be oppressive for this reason, because it will be a worker state, not a bourgeois state. And we'll do this, and then after that, we will get to communism. And then the anarchists continue to say, no, that's not going to happen. We need to start transitioning to anarchism directly. The working class should directly take control of the economy, not empower a workers' state, but rather the workers should, in their workplaces, take control of the factories, take control of all the enterprises, and start building a communist society immediately. And for a long time, this was just a theoretical argument, and then we can talk about Leninism, because Leninism is understood to be one of the, I guess, most influential practical applications of Marxism, both by its proponents and by its detractors, such as myself. So when Lenin came around, and when the Bolshevik Revolution happened in the Russian Empire, the Leninists and the Bolshevik Party put into practice this idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat. They overthrew the bourgeois state and created a new state that they defined as a workers' state. And the idea was that this is great. This is a state that now belongs to working people. It will represent working people. In practice, that is not what happened. And there are scores of anarchist first-hand accounts, first-hand anarchist critiques of what went down in the Soviet Union, especially going back even to the very early years, the first years after the Russian Revolution. Essentially, this state developed and with the intention of representing the working class, but that's not what happened. What happened was that a new bureaucracy developed, the bureaucracy of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And this bureaucracy replaced the bourgeoisie and would become the new ruling class, the new class that controlled the means of production. And always, of course, this new bureaucracy would claim to be a party of the working class, a party that represents the workers. And always, and of course, this party called itself the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, not the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, because communism was always defined as the end goal by Leninists. All the discourse of the Soviet Union, all the public discourse was aimed towards communism. That was always the goal. But soon it became clear that communism was not something that's going to happen in the present. Communism was defined more as a future goal to strive for eventually. I don't know. It ceased to be a practical political belief and seemed to be more of like, I guess, I don't know, not unlike messianic religious notions, like something that will happen in the future, but not today, eventually. So that's really what defined the difference between the anarchist approach to communism and the Marxist approach to communism. Marxists would continue throughout the 20th century with this strategy. Sometimes through the Leninist strategy, sometimes through other strategies, like such as the social democratic strategy, which is its own story that I'm not going to go into in this video. And Marxists generally, I mean, there are many different kinds of Marxists. Some of them are very hardcore authoritarian, like defending the policies of Stalin, defending the policies of Mao 100% or 90% or 80%, whatever. And then there are other Marxists who are more critical, who have more nuance. There actually are some anti-authoritarian currents within Marxism that I do respect. But the dominant trend within Marxism throughout the 20th century and still today is the notion that we have to empower the state. And this is something that anarchists have always disagreed with. Now, let's jump to anarcho-communism, because anarcho-communism was actually a term that was used before the Bolshevik Revolution, before Lenin took power. Anarcho-communism was developed most by Peter Kropotkin. And when he spoke of anarcho-communism, he was writing about something that had nothing to do with Lenin or the Bolsheviks, because Lenin or the Bolsheviks weren't even a political force at the time. Kropotkin was writing something that was very similar to what anarchists have been striving for. And there have been different currents within anarchism. Like, not every current of anarchism has been for communism. For instance, Bakunin was defined himself as a collectivist. Like, he did not really see that this society could operate according to their means, each according to their abilities. So he imagined more of a system with a type of currency that was some sort of like labor vouchers. So there are different currents within anarchism. Not all anarchists are down with the idea of communism. But I want to focus on those anarchists who are, like Kropotkin. So when Kropotkin spoke of anarcho-communism, he was talking about this stateless classless society, and he was talking about the politics of going to that society directly, to begin to organize right now. In our movements, in our anarchist organizing, our goal is to reach communism. And he was very much against this idea of a transition stage that would empower the state, because that's like the opposite, like in some respects. Like, you have bourgeois capitalism right now, and then you empower this state, and then according to the Marxists, it will eventually go this way towards communism. But due to the example of Leninism, which happened later on, we see that that's not what happened. It stayed like this. It even became more authoritarian. So, I mean, that's basically the difference between the anarchist approach to communism and the Marxist approach to communism. So why did we have this misunderstanding today? I think it's like, because what I've told you is a summary of like the anarchist theory on communism and the Marxist theory on communism. But today, I think, and it's both a good thing and a bad thing. Like, on the one hand, like learning about leftist theory in some ways is pretty accessible today through online, like through memes, through through a lot of spheres on Facebook, on Twitter. And it's great that that the left is becoming accessible today to people, that it's like not just staying in these like old organizations, but that more people are learning. That's a good thing. But on the other hand, it has this negative side effect that, like, when people are introduced to communism when people are introduced through communism through a meme that fails to define communism, and when people, then you get this misconception that, oh yeah, communism, like the Soviet Union, and then anarchism, like the Black Flag and everything. And I like anarchism, and I like communism, and like they're all good things. And like, I think, unfortunately, I think it gets kind of jumbled up, and like honestly, and like with all I mean, respect for people who are learning about like leftism today, like I was some years ago. Like, I mean, everybody has their learning process of learning about leftist politics, and figuring out what exactly you believe, where you stand, and like everybody's at a different stage in that process, and we're all still learning. But like, I just think it would be helpful if at least in addition to like learning about the left through the sphere of memes and stuff, that people also looked into more of a background on what is anarchism, what is communism, what is Marxism. And I don't know, and because yeah, it's like because here's what bugs me about this misconception about anarcho-communism is that you have like I meet somebody who's tells me that they're an anarchist, and I think that I assume that they're like someone with whom I have a lot of alignment with. But then I've made the mistake that, like, as an anarchist who has gone through his own political process of political learning, I've made this assumption that people have gone through the same process to get to where they are. And people haven't. Everybody's process is different. But this is how I find, for instance, people who, on the one hand, say that they're an anarchist, and then when we start talking about something like, for example, like the Assad regime in Syria, like this person starts saying, "Oh, I think it's a misconception that anarchists have to be anti-authoritarian. Um, like, really, anarchism isn't that, and actually, we have to be anti-imperialist and support the government of Bashar al-Assad." Or like, yeah, that's something that I've run into. And on the other hand, like, for example, just talking about simple things like the Cuban Revolution, and it is a nuanced topic, and um, there are positive aspects of the Cuban Revolution. I don't want to deny that, but the the Cuban Revolution was and the government of Cuba after the Cuban Revolution was a Leninist one, and it followed a pattern very similar to other Leninist governments, in which it became very authoritarian, in which it, especially like anarchists should understand this, that there was an anarchist movement in Cuba before the Cuban Revolution. There was a strong especially an anarcho-syndicalist movement. And after the revolution, this movement was crushed. This movement essentially ceased to exist because Cuban anarchists like found themselves in the situation where they wanted to continue to agitate for anarchism, to continue to organize for anarchism, and now they came into conflict with the Cuban state, the state that was now a Marxist-Leninist one, and this state would not allow agitation for communism that was like independent of the state, that was critical of the state. This is how many Cuban anarchists found themselves in prison, how many Cuban anarchists found themselves sent into exile. And, I don't know how much more I can say. I could go on a lot about some of these historical examples. Like, I don't know, the example of Ukraine, of Nestor Makhno in Ukraine, and the Revolutionary Insurrectionary Army of Ukraine, which was an anarchist faction in the Ukrainian Civil War that fought for anarcho-communism directly, that organized essentially a predominantly a peasant anarcho-communist society, because it was in a rural area. And they found themselves at first on the same side as the Bolsheviks, and fighting against all of the reactionary factions, fighting against the counter-revolutionary whites, fighting against the Ukrainian bourgeois nationalist state, and then once those factions were defeated, once the Bolsheviks were on the upswing in the Civil War, they came to see that they no longer needed the anarchists, and the anarchists quickly they switched from, at one day they were allies, and the next day they were declared enemies. And anarchists had to flee into exile, and those who stayed and who tried to continue their political activities especially found themselves imprisoned and shot. So, I mean, that's the history between anarchism and Leninism. It's not a friendly one. And I just wish more people looked into that, who are interested in both in anarchism and in communism. And okay, I don't want to go over 20 minutes. 20 minutes is long. I'm finishing this video right now. If you have any questions, let me know. If you have ideas for videos, let me know. Maybe subscribe if you like what I'm doing. Let me know. Take care for now.